Hi, it's Mark Owen from Moose Marketing PR, the editor of Punchline magazine. Today, I'm joined by Alex Chalk, the MP for Cheltenham. Good evening, Alex. Thanks ever so much for joining Punchline Talks.
Pleasure. Thank you for having me.
Alex, first question. How long have you been an MP of Cheltenham now? It's quite a while, isn't it? Obviously,
Yeah,
elections, 2 victories.
You're absolutely right. It's 5 years. So yeah, in May 2015, and here I am. So yeah, it's been quite an extraordinary time. I think if you were going to pick a time in British politics, this has got to be one of the most eventful.
Well, especially you've had, well, first of all, you had Theresa May and all the hoo-ha with that. New MP with Boris, you've had Brexit, and now the pandemic itself. Where do we really start? Let's start at the very beginning, if you don't mind. How did you get into politics? Were you always interested when you were a young lad?
I guess, I've always been really interested in the kind of the problems and the issues facing this country, and I knew I was kind of had this ambition to put myself amongst the great problems of our country, to see if I could play a modest and no doubt inadequate part in resolving them. I always knew that I was interested in, as I say, in the fortunes of our country and trying to resolve the issues. But I spent a long time, 16 years as a barrister before I came into politics, and that was worthwhile stuff. I was prosecuting and defending, but particularly prosecuting in big chunky terrorism cases, the bomb plot cases and murder and manslaughter, and so I did a lot of work for the Serious Fraud Office, a lot of work for the Financial Conduct Authority. So that was very fulfilling. And then, but when Cheltenham came up, Cheltenham was my hometown. I thought, look, I do have these kind of public service instincts. I want to give this a go, and that's when it all changed.
It wasn't an easy fight, was it? Martin Hallwood had been here a long time. The MP for the Liberal Democrats been here a long time. Don't mind me saying it got a little bit dirty. Look, I'm not saying on your side or his side, but there was a lot of stuff flying around.
Yeah, look, I hope it certainly didn't get dirty from this side. But look, I tell you one thing, it was certainly close fought. There's no doubt about that, because as you say, the Lib Dems have been in since 1992. I remember meeting as a kid the previous Conservative MP, was a guy called Charlie Irving, and I was a young boy at the time. But look, it was certainly closely fought. There is one point that I would observe over the last 5 years, though. You talk about sort of dirty fighting or whatever, and obviously I don't want to get too involved in that stuff, but there is a general sense that politics, probably because of social media, frankly, has become, it's always been pretty rough and tough, but it's now a contact sport. It really is. And we shouldn't be afraid of robust debate, because people's lives and livelihoods depend on the decisions we make. So it's right, people should be held to account, and people have got to make their point fairly and firmly. But there's a lot of bad stuff that now goes on, I'm bound to say. And the 2017 election in particular, and the most recent one, there's a lot of stuff that's been said online, which really should have been said differently or not at all. And I do think all Western society, well, frankly, all societies are having to grapple with the impact of social media, which is tending to kind of corrode the national debate a bit. And you've seen that in the United States, a very polarized society. And I really, 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 really hope that we don't go down that road, and that we remember we all have so much more in common than divides us. I don't want to be too heavy early on in the interview, but I do think there's an issue that we've got to try to keep the civility of our discourse and learn to disagree agreeably, if you know what I mean.
Well, I totally agree with you. Being a barrister, then should social media be controlled more, especially when you have accounts and people aren't accountable. So you have people who they're not really representing themselves. It's very, very easy. Well, more than I do. It's very easy to pretend to be somebody else. I talked to Siobhan about this actually a few months ago. What's your thoughts on that? Freedom of speech or accountability?
Come the revolution, when I'm in number 10, I'm switching it off. I'll give everyone 2 weeks notice that it's all getting switched off. I'm joking, of course, but look, it's been very interesting for me watching quite a lot of stuff that's been going on in the media. So Marcus Rashford has been apparently horribly racially abused, which is disgusting. And then we heard about Captain Tom, that his family shielding from him that he'd been trolled despite being a centenarian who'd raised over 30 million pounds in the years. It's inexplicable. And I was watching that thinking, I'm not surprised. And by the way, this goes on in other spheres the entire time. And whether you're Lady Gaga or the MP for Cheltenham, anybody who's in a prominent role, by the way, opposition MP, it just, for me, it doesn't bother it. Frankly, for me, genuinely, I'm entirely and intensely relaxed about it. And there's lots of positive stuff there as well. But I do know when I speak to young people, and today I was speaking to a young lad from Pates who's really interested in going into politics. And I was saying, yeah, definitely do it. Serve your country, serve your community. This is what it's about. I feel this strong sense of public service, and we need people of ability and integrity to get into this. But don't get into this if you haven't got some resilience. Don't get into this if you have a wobble. It's not for the faint-hearted. You've got to be tough. You've got to be tough. And those are important qualities. We need to ensure that our young people are courageous and they're tough and all that sort of thing. But if you're going to crumple in the first political gale, best you don't stand for election.
So as a politician, then you didn't really answer my question.
Oh, what would I do? Okay,
sorry.
No.
Should people be allowed to not have their true identity?
Sorry, you're right.
On Twitter or Facebook.
No, well, I mean, the argument that's always put back at you is that, well, what happens if there are these oppressive regimes in North Korea, or you're a supporter of Alexei Navalny, for example, and you're in Russia, and that if you put your name to the fact that you support Alexei Navalny, there may be a knock on the door and you might find yourself banged up. And that's always the counter argument that's made. And it's got some currency. Look, it's perfectly clear what I think we should do. It's really not very difficult. And I was making these arguments in 2016 when I produced a report with the Children's Society and Young Minds, because I've been to all these schools in Cheltenham, all this kind of mental health explosion, which was then we were starting to talk about. And it was quite clear that social media had an awful lot to do with it. So I said to the social media companies, right, we should have transparency about the number of individuals you, Facebook, Twitter, whoever, are taking off the road. In other words, whose accounts you are suspending because of behavior that's unacceptable. So you have these codes of conduct. Don't be abusive, don't, no hate speech, all this kind of stuff. So we know what your rules are. What are you doing to police them? And be transparent about it. Because it's a sledgehammer to crack a nut to say, right, well, we're going to have everyone's names revealed and accounts and all that kind of stuff. A more proportionate, certainly as a calibrated initial step, would be to say, right, we are going to publish data about the fact that this month we have suspended 10,000 accounts. We have deleted 5,000 accounts. I suggested they should have a yellow card and a red card system, so that if you misbehave, you get yellow card. Because we're seeing Donald Trump had his account suspended, deleted, or whatever it is, and yet I suspect, Mark, that you probably wouldn't be able to name more than 1, 2, or 3 people whose accounts had been suspended or deleted. If this was something that was happening regularly, it would have a civilizing effect, and yet they don't do it. Why don't they do it? Because it's not great for the business model. And that ultimately is the issue. So one of the things that I was calling for is transparency. Show us the number of complaints you've received, the action that you took, the number you suspended, how long you suspended them for, and how many accounts you deleted. If we had that, we'd be able to turn around and say, oh yeah, do you know, I think they've struck the right balance. But they won't strike the right balance. And I'm afraid I just think that the social media companies are, my expression, no one else's, they're walking backwards slowly. So they see the fact that this regulation is coming, and they want to squeeze this lemon for as long as they can before the regulation takes real effect. And I just think it's pretty unscrupulous, to be honest. It's
a bit like trying to close down someone's account who's died as well, by the way. Facebook and Twitter have got millions and millions of accounts that, because obviously it goes by volume of people for their advertisers, a lot of them are no longer on this earth as well. So that's a different thing. But they could sort it out. They got a lot of money, and we know they can do it because, by the way, when there is things like child pornography, that's straight off. They can get it off very, very quickly. But when you say, right, here's an account which is a huge amount of abuse and all this kind of stuff that's going on, they don't really want to know. They don't want to know. So they are accessories to a corrosive public discourse. And I'm not suggesting people shouldn't be accountable for their own actions. Everyone's got to behave and all that kind of stuff. But they have such power, these companies, but they're not doing everything that they reasonably should. I'm not suggesting there should never be a crossword on Twitter. That would be absurd. But they could reasonably do more to create a more frankly, a more civilized space. Well, as we're talking about the internet and we're talking about online, Obviously, one of the big things that's happened over the pandemic is the fact that a lot more people are spending time on Amazon. High streets are going to be absolutely crushed. Let's be honest about it. Will they come back? Do you think the likes of Amazon, Google, internet companies, should they be taxed more? Should it be a little bit more of a level playing field, or is that just not the way that you do it again?
No question they should pay more, and they've got to pay more, and they will pay more. And I think if you listen out for what's going to take place in the budget, there's got to be a level playing field. I mean, having said that, we can't sit here like King Canute, and just trying to order the tide not to come in. The fact is, there is a force sweeping through retail that no government would be able to withstand. So whilst, yes, we have to make sure that the likes of Amazon and Google and these online retailers pay their fair share to level stuff up, there is no government policy that is going to be able to turn back the clock. So the question that here in Gloucestershire we've got to address is, how do you take this tide and channel it in a way that serves the public interest? And I think it's tolerably clear what you can do in places like Cheltenham, where I'm sitting, where I'm speaking to you from now. And I've been, again, I've been saying this for a while, but I think the pandemic's made it clear, is that you've got to reduce the footprint in a way that is organized. In other words, what you don't do is just allow, in an uncoordinated way, parts of the high street, a building here, a building there, to flip into resi, because you then get this kind of gap-toothed high street. It's just a mess, isn't it? You have a shop there. It's just not very clever. So what you need to do as the local authorities, you've got to say, right, okay, we reckon that we need to reduce our retail footprint by 50%, say. So around Cheltenham, we should have a T-shaped area of retail around the prom, going up to John Lewis in the east, and maybe up to, I don't know, the end of the lower high street, or just up to Henrietta Street in the west. And then beyond that, this is just a suggestion, there'll be any number of different permutations. And then in those other zones, allow the flipping to take place, the permitted development. Now, for the individual who owns that property, they're happy, because retail tends to be less valuable than resi. So you flip it to resi and you make money. But that has another impact, you see, because you then bring people into the town centre, particularly young people who don't necessarily want a big garden, can't be bothered with all that, but they're there and they're around. But you also concentrate your vibrancy in a specific area. And the final point I want to make on that is that we've also got to, I think, try to regenerate brownfield sites instead of automatically moving to concreting over a whole load of green space, because the green space is one of the things that makes Cheltenham and Gloucestershire a really great place to be. But you're at risk of a donut effect if you hollow out the town centre and everyone is sitting there and they're spending much more time at home as well, sitting in the peripheries. That's just bad urban planning. And the final thing, we've got a situation in Cheltenham where there was £3 million that was given to build out, to subsidize from the government, right, to build out North Place car park, the mother of all brownfield sites. I mean, there is like the quintessential brownfield site. It literally is a brownfield, and that could have brought a whole load of affordable housing. And that £3 million has had to be paid back to the government because a scheme wasn't brought forward. I think that's just a crying shame. So the short answer is, yeah, there are things that are going to happen. Yes, we must go after Amazon. Yes, we must go after Google, but we must also channel the tide to serve the public interest and use it to bring forward some town centre housing for young people to improve their prospects and to revive the town centre.
Well, that surely brings us very, very nicely to business rates.
Right.
Montpellier itself, I remember the gap closing, Montpellier is looking very, very tired. How that is going to bounce back, I think it's going to take years. And that has, I believe, something to do with business rates as well moving forward. Are you lobbying the government? Are you talking to the government about business rates as well, Alex?
I mean, absolutely. In a particular interest in what you may recall is before the pandemic, there was a push that any property with a rateable value of under 51,000, as you may recall, the government came in and slashed a third off the business rates there. So it wasn't like people were saying, raising this issue and nothing, and then the pandemic came along. Whereas, the pandemic meant that people aren't paying business rates. I just note, by the way, that is in effect in just a town like Cheltenham, 115,000 people. So that measure alone of no business rates in Cheltenham is worth 30 million quid. To put that in context, the entire borough council's budget is about half that. right? So it gives you an idea. These are very, very significant sums of money. But the short answer is, yes, we do need to rebalance that. And as I say, there was a situation with pubs that theirs was capped, and if they had a rateable value of under £100,000, they got £1,000 sort of discounted off their rates, etc. And of course, there's the rates relief for small businesses under 12,000 rateable value and so on. So there is a lot that has been done in this space, but there is no doubt that there needs to be a real reckoning in this space to properly level the playing field between bricks and mortar and online, because there are things, notwithstanding my point about bringing some resi into the town centre, you still do need to have retail. Retail will continue to be there. Apart from anything else, we don't all just want to sit in our homes all day. We want to come out. We want to go to the town centre. We want to socialise. We want to be communal. We want to get out and about. And so there will be a demand for that. And we've got to make sure that we help those businesses to survive and indeed to thrive. And necessarily that will mean root and branch review of the whole business rate system.
One of the things I'm always championed, and as you know, I used to be chairman of the Federation of Small Business and regional chair as well, is the way that sole traders have been, haven't had the funding available or backup, it seems, from the government. There's a nice piece in the Times today, actually, saying exactly that, with the Federation of Small Businesses lobbying government, especially for the budget, to help directors, single directors of companies. So limited companies who sort of slip through the net, really, especially some of them in the hospitality sector.
Yeah. Do you want me to? Well, look, I mean, some of the most distressing and upsetting emails I've received are from people who, instinctively, I absolutely want to be on the side of people who go out and they take a risk. They said, "Do you know what? I'm not going to go for the safe route in life. I'm going to branch out on my own. I'm going to not take a massive salary myself. I'm going to invest in this. I'm going to take a punt," basically. And those are the folks who not only do we rely on to pay the taxes so that we can have an NHS, etc., but they're also the people who grow the economy. So some of the most heartbreaking emails have been from people who have said, "Hang on a minute. We're really grateful for furlough, and I've been able to furlough all my staff, but I'm pretty knackered here. And if I'm not going to be able to bounce back, then there aren't going to be any jobs for these guys." So I totally get that. So just a couple of points that I'd want to make. First, it is important to look at the context of the overall package. I'm not going to labor the point, but just to put some figures on this. As I say, Cheltenham's about 115,000 people. The total size of the package, which includes furlough, SEIS, bounce back loans, as we talked about, the business rates rebate, the fact that there's been the hardship fund, there's been the retail, hospitality and leisure grants, 20,000, 10,000, all that stuff, is around about, wait for it, nearly £300 million. I mean, this is just crazy sums of money. The local authority, as I say, spends about 15 million a year on your bins and all the planning and stuff. So it gives you an idea. So that's that point. The second issue is on the point about directors. It's of course those directors who pay themselves in dividends, right? Now, of course, I'd love you to look at the WhatsApp groups, because I've been making this point again and again and again. There is no suggestion that is a wheeze, that is a clever sort of duck and dive to kind of mitigate it. By the way, about 5 years ago, it was tax efficient to do that, but it isn't really now because of the way that corporation tax, etc. The issue, however, from Treasury's point of view, is that supposing there's you, Mark, you're, I don't know, well, let's not take you. Let's just take an example. Joe Bloggs, he gets £30,000 a year and he gets it from dividends. There you go. And he fills out his tax reform, dividends, receipts, tick, amount £30,000, and he goes off and gets taxed in the normal way. The trouble is, if that tax, if there's a similar tax return and it's filled out by a pensioner, 70 years old, he's got a share portfolio of, say for example, £750,000, and he also declares 30 grand of dividends from that share portfolio. He ticks the box, dividends, dividend income, £30,000, off you go. Now, they both get taxed in the normal way. The difficulty, so I'm told, because I can tell you I've raised this again and again and again, the difficulty is, how can the revenue ensure that that pensioner, who, by the way, you know, I'm sorry he's lost his dividend income, but probably taxpayers shouldn't be subbing that given the massive amount of wealth, relatively speaking, that he or she's got. How can you distinguish between dividend income from the guy who's receiving it as if it were income, normal income like PAYE, and the guy who's receiving it as investment income? Because dividends are investment income. They're not normal income, so to speak. That's the difficulty. However, I have pushed the point again and again and again. And I was told, I raised it with Jesse Norman, who's one of the junior ministers in the Treasury. And I was advised they were looking at a director's scheme. And I've said, look, there's no time to lose because these guys are holding on by their fingertips. And if they go bust, then the pack of cards comes down because all those jobs which are contingent on them won't be there. So I realized none of that is a solution. I'm very, very conscious of it. And all I can tell you is I take every opportunity to push on that because I'm extremely mindful of the point you make.
Yeah, I won't dwell on it again. You know, I've been in Zoom meetings and we've had people cry.
I know. It's desperate.
It is heartbreaking. I am the same, by the way. I run a limited company. I take my dividend. And the only way I can take my dividends, like a lot of us, if we actually make a profit in the first place. A lot of us actually plow that dividend back into the company.
I know you do.
Anyway, we won't dwell on that long.
No. But you know what? You're being very dignified about it. But I know that this has been incredibly tough. And there are some people who only pay themselves a modest amount of PAYE. So they're only able to take kind of like 700 quid a month. I mean, this is really, and they've got mortgages and bills. And I know there have been some very, very dark moments for people. And to be told, oh yeah, well, by the way, we're spending a load of money on this. It is true. That is true. And I think genuinely the UK's overall economic response, it's not me saying it, it's the IMF saying it, compares very favorably internationally. There is no doubt this is a cadre of people I'm very worried about. So yeah, hands up.
Let's talk about Cheltenham and moving forward. Obviously, there's the Cyberpunk. There are some good stories. Let's concentrate on that.
There are some massively good stories. And the cyber thing is something you talked about in how long I've been the MP for. Back in 2014, I launched this vision of, I called it a tech hub then, because I was sitting there thinking, well, hang on, why is it we've got a situation where you've got GCHQ, which is going to absorb something like £3 billion of public money over the next 10 years. And yet it's kind of hermetically sealed. And we understand that from the point of view of national security, of course. And yet, if you look at other countries, look at Israel, most obvious example, they take their equivalent of GCHQ and they cite it alongside their equivalent of Cambridge University, Ben Gurion University. It's a very porous membrane between the two. And they use that know-how to fire and inspire civilian startups. And here's one stat to conjure with. If you remember nothing else about this talk, remember this. Israel, a country of what, 8 million people or so, just a bit bigger than Scotland, not much. In terms of cybersecurity venture capital, it receives 25% of global cybersecurity venture capital. That country, and it does so because it has embraced high tech very effectively and critically for our learning here in the UK. It has done so by ensuring that its tax dollars or tax shekels actually support the local economy, and that's what we've got to do here in the UK. And I'm pleased to say that we already have a cyber innovation center. So we've got businesses, including local businesses, but also people have come from elsewhere in Europe to be nurtured by GCHQ. And I met Wera UK, who are helping to do this. It's all funded by the government. At least 30 businesses have been through there. And when a group of them went off to Palo Alto before the pandemic, 3 of them were assessed as being potential unicorns, so a billion pound companies. So it's hugely exciting. And I don't want people to think, oh, well, the cyber stuff is always in the future. No, it's happening now. So in Cheltenham, in and around Cheltenham, there are really exciting startups which are being nurtured by the great minds at HQ to become the great employers of the future. And the last thing I want to say on it, the reason why I'm so passionate about it is not just jobs for jobs' sake, although that is incredibly important. 3 of the 18 wards that I represent are in the bottom decile of income per capita anywhere in the country. And I think any MP, whichever political party you're in, you've got to have a plan for how you solve that. And my feeling is if you can generate that kind of opportunity, then I can say to that young person who might have come from the wrong side of the tracks, here you go, look at the bright lights. These are the opportunities. If he or she doesn't want to take it, there's nothing I can do. But I want them to have the best opportunities anywhere in the UK.
Now, the big thing about the Cyberpunk to me is the fact that junction 10 will be done on the M5 motorway, which is great. That links up to junction 11, is it? No, junction 9 of Tewkesbury. And
That's right.
along Tewkesbury, we have Ashchurch going to be built, and the Cotswolds Quays. Now, the idea of Cotswold Quays is to pitch, you know, kind of, you could say it's similar to Gloucester Quays, but it's based in the Cotswold. Are you worried that something like Ashchurch, Cotswold Quays will actually suck money out of Cheltenham, or do you see it as a big plus?
No, I'm not. Listen, I think, you know, whether you're a business person or whether you're in politics, I think you should welcome investment and innovation and embracing the future. And you're just going to have to get smart and get fit and get with the program. And you talk about those areas, junction 10 and junction 9. So the really important point is this, I think. Cheltenham is somewhere which is kind of not really in the southwest, although technically it is. It's not really in the Midlands. It's not really in the Thames Valley, and it's certainly not in Wales. So it kind of sits in isolation. And yet, if you improve the network, the infrastructure around it, so you sort out junction 10, for example, so people can whiz up and down to Birmingham and Bristol. If you sort out the A417, which we're getting ever closer to breaking ground on, as you know, we've really, really made enormous progress on that. If you sort out the connectivity of the trains to London, and of course, we're going to be having eventually Crossrail will be picking up from Reading, etc., then Cheltenham's liability becomes its great strength, because you've got a beautiful place to live and work. And you can jump off, you can be in Birmingham in seconds, or Bristol, you can get to Cardiff, you can get down to Swindon in the car if that's what you want to do. And so the short answer is, if that means that there's going to be therefore other competitors nearby, that's fine, you know, that's fine. But Cheltenham has got to get with the program. By that, I mean, it cannot continue to have, for example, the most expensive parking anywhere in the county, which we do. I mean, it's mad, absolutely mad. So what I really encourage local politicians to look at is, we are in a competitive environment. Get real. We've really got to get focused and ensure that we encourage people to come to us. And if that means we have some healthy competition up the road, and that means that we sharpen our pencil, that's absolutely fine. But last point, I would like to see, for example, no parking after 6 p.m. So we can say Cheltenham is the go-to early evening destination for food, for bars. We have fantastic bars on the prom, etc. Come to Cheltenham, and we can build on this being a destination Cheltenham stuff, the Cheltenham festivals and all that, to be much more of a kind of a leisure destination. But to do that, we are going to have to compete against Gloucester, which is fine. Healthy competition is a good thing.
Let's talk about Westminster very quickly.
Yep.
You sit on a number of panels and committees, and one of them is obviously the Justice. I don't know the terminology for it. Was it the Justice panel?
Well, I did sit on the Justice Select Committee, but now that's all right. But now I'm a minister, so instead I have to go before the committee and get. So previously I was an interrogator, and now I'm the one who gets interrogated. Yeah. So my areas of ministerial responsibility are: I'm the Victims Minister, Family Courts Minister, Legal Aid, Human Rights. I'm Minister for Coroners. And domestic abuse. I do all those sorts of things. So those are my kind of areas of ministerial responsibility. And as you can imagine, there's quite a lot going on at the moment. We have £40 million to roll out to police and crime commissioners to support victims of domestic abuse, and we've increased funding for the National Domestic Abuse Helpline, and all sorts of things like that, which are incredibly important. And we're taking the domestic abuse bill through Parliament, which is going to provide a lot of protections from that heinous crime. And you'll know whether it was stalking, which was something that I really campaigned on in the past because of a Cheltenham MP, and we all know about the dreadful case of Holly Gazzard, etc. But this is something that Gloucestershire has got a real role in terms of protecting victims of domestic abuse.
No, I think you've done a fantastic job on that, Alex. And what about the probation service? Now that's being rolled back, isn't it? Now it was a Tory policy to make it took it to the private sector. Chris Gradings, I remember us writing a story on it around 5-6 years ago. Yeah. How do you see that rolling back? Is it still the private sector going to be involved, or do you see it?
Well, you're right. So there were CRCs, the community rehabilitation companies, but I think the view has been taken that it's better to fold those back into probation. I mean, the idea was perfectly sensible, that you would have all the the most serious offenders be dealt with by probation service, and then the lower level offences, they could be dealt with much more bespoke and innovative community solutions. And I think, in fairness, the results on that were mixed. Let's put it like that. I think that I think probation service will do a really good job. It's an incredibly difficult job being a probation officer, and I have nothing but admiration and support. I have to say that is very important. What is equally important, and certainly the focus of a lot of stuff that I'm trying to do, is to get the courts operating at full tempo, because they came to a stop for a period, and that was absolutely right in the first pandemic, in the first lockdown. And let me tell you, jury trials and pandemics go together like a fish and a bicycle. They really are problematic. And in the magistrates' court, Cheltenham Magistrates Court and others, they've managed to erode the backlog very, very quickly. They've done a really, really good job, and I think we will erode it later this year. It's much more difficult in jury trials because you've got the courtrooms are much more restricted. You have cell circulation areas. You have jury assembly points, which are at much lower capacity. Jury trial rooms themselves, retiring rooms. So it's much more difficult. But there's been a huge amount of investment going to the courts, the thick end of £250 million. We've got 60 more by the end of this month, or end of March rather, 60 more Nightingale courts. So that's going to make a big difference. And we've got way, way, way more trial courts than we had pre-pandemic. But it's a long slog. It's difficult. But I want victims of crime to know that the courts are still there. They're still providing orders, domestic violence protection orders. They're still there providing non-molestation orders, occupation orders. They're there to help you. And we are going to be carrying on increasing capacity so that people can get justice. That's critically important.
Alex, we're fast running out of time. It always goes so quickly whenever I chat to you. Very brief question. Are you reading a book at the moment? And if so, what is it? Are you reading a novel or anything?
Am I sorry about that?
Do you have time?
I am reading a book. Oh, I didn't know you were going to ask me that. I'll show you what I'm reading if you like. It's just here. I got it for Christmas.
Oh.
Barack Obama, Promised Land. I'll tell you what, he can write a bit, that guy. So yeah, I'm reading that.
It'd be very interesting to see what Trump's book is like. It'd probably be dot to dot coloring.
Yeah, it'll just be a compilation of his tweets.
Probably.
Yeah.
It'll make a mint, no matter. Top 3 business tips, sir.
Gosh, well, look, I mean, I wouldn't presume to kind of tell businesses. All I know is that when I was a barrister for 16 years, you're kind of running your own business. You're a bit of a one-man band, and I know it's a really trite thing to say, but I've always felt that ultimately you've got to be the hardest worker in the room. I know that it's kind of trite, but I know with my office, we have 5 people in my office, and the most powerful thing I can do to try to galvanize and motivate is to lead by example. So I'm always there before everyone. I leave last, and they know that I work on the weekends. And so I think that's important, that they know that the guy at the top is going to set that example. So listen, I don't want to kind of lecture or presume to, but I do think leading by example is critically important. And then, the only other thing that I just would want to say is I really hope people will hang tough and understand that I know all the time there's the praise for those who are working in the public sector doing a fantastic job, who deserve it, by the way. They're delivering the vaccination program, etc. But we don't hear enough for those guys in business whose taxes pay the wages in the public sector. And I think sometimes that we are a bit unbalanced in the way that we speak. Where are the kind of, why don't we celebrate the heroes of business? And I think sometimes we're a little bit ambivalent about the idea of people going out and making money. We shouldn't be. We should say, those are the guys, we celebrate success, we reward success, we want to motivate success. We should be relaxed about it and recognize that this is very good for society because it provides all the jobs and so on and so forth. So I think hang tough would be my second point. And my third point is a plug for the Kickstart program. It's really, really good. You can employ people from 16 to 24 if they're on UC for up to 6 months, and the government will pay all of the minimum wage stuff. And it's gone down incredibly well. And I would just invite you to look at that to help kickstart your business, to keep the show on the road, and to provide great opportunities for our young people.
Alex Chalk, thank you for joining Punchline Talks. Always a great pleasure to see you. Thank you
for having me.